Grim Fandango was so ambitious, and the thing that kind of gets the most attention is its amazing art and design and those pre-rendered 3D graphics, and those are incredible, but it seems like they kind of overshadow the narrative and writing of the game, which I'm not trying to say is better than the graphics and the game design, but I think they are perfectly equal and are married in a really cool way. So the game has this really unique 4-year structure, which sees the player controlling Manny Calavera, the protagonist, for about a day, and each day is a year apart. With this approach, it constantly feels as if the player is thrown into the middle of a story, and the game's writing needs to accommodate this, so it has to be detailed and realistic and create the sense that these characters have history with each other, and it does it really successfully. But amazingly, it doesn't feel too expositional either. You know, it doesn't feel like you're constantly being spoon-fed what's happened in the year that you were missing. The section where this aspect shines the most is, it's probably the most praised and talked about section of the game, but it's like that for a reason, and it's the second year of the game in Rubalcaba. Just a little spoiler warning, this will be quite a detailed analysis of year 2, and so if you're planning to play Grim, I suggest coming back to this video after you've done this section of the game. Or if you're playing it now and you've beaten this section, then you can watch it because it doesn't spoil anything further than Rubalcaba. But if you have no desire to play Grim, but if you're interested in the marriage of narrative and game design, then stick around. But I highly recommend experiencing it for yourself first. So, here's some context. Manny has been working in Rubalcaba for about a year off screen, and he's now the owner of a casino. And he needs to leave Rubalcaba fast, and the only way to do it is by boarding a ship. But there's 3 things standing in his way. He needs tools, a union card, and he has to stop the last member of the crew from boarding so he can take his place. These are the 3 main puzzles that structure your time in Rubalcaba. They can be completed in any order, and most of the places in Rubalcaba can also be explored in any order. And this crazy openness is what makes Rubalcaba such an impressive feat of narrative and game design. There's a lot going on in this city, and there's a wide variety of characters, and they all hold their kind of unique perspective on the world and their own information that is specific to them. But there are so many of these interactions, so many dialogue options and dialogue trees, and they can be approached in almost any order, and this creates hundreds of different combinations of ways that someone could uncover the story of Rubalcaba. With this in mind, the writing has to kind of fall under a set of rules. It's got to give the player just enough information from one character so that it can kind of stand on its own, but also be slotted into the wider narrative of Rubalcaba, but also has to not over-inform the player or rely too heavily on the player's knowledge of the city or rely on a piece of information that they might have missed from another character. The writing of Rubalcaba is like a complex theorem, and I want to pick it apart and look at the individual stories and how the player can uncover them and the order they can do it and how it affects the overall narrative. So here's a map of Rubalcaba. Big thanks to Matty Rife, I hope I'm saying their name right, but they drew the map and they let me use it, so thank you to them. Here are the major characters that you'll be drawing narrative information from. All characters in this year are important in my opinion, but here's just the bare minimum to understand the story. So there's Chow Chilla Charlie, the Seabees, Olivia Ofrenda, Nick Virago, Lola, and Maximino. Here they all are on the map, and this is where Manny starts at the beginning of the year on the map. So I'm just going to go through the story of Rubalcaba in a random order that the player could experience, and because you uncover the story by kind of digesting information from different characters, so this is just a random sequence of the characters that you could talk to. So first there's Chow Chilla Charlie, which makes sense to talk to him first, because he's in the club. So he tells you that he was kicked out of the cat races, and that Maximino has his money. And of course you don't know what either of those things mean at all at this point. So you move on and you meet the Seabees, and they say Maximino is the big boy in town. So you know that Max has stolen Charlie's money and that he's a big boy in town. It makes him seem pretty corrupt and quite a bit threatening at this point. And they also say that he gets his orders from El Mara, which is a hint at something that will be revealed later in the story. So then you might go to the Blue Casket and you'll see Olivia. And the first thing you'll see is Olivia being involved with Nick. And then you'll be told that Olivia is in a relationship with Maximino, so you know that Olivia is cheating on Max with Nick. If you also keep talking to her, she'll tell you that Lola is in love with Maximino. Now Lola is the photo girl of the Blue Casket, and she takes a picture of Nick and Olivia being involved when you enter the casket. You'll also be introduced to Nick at this point, because he is with Olivia, and you understand that he is Maximino's private lawyer. So all of this kind of builds up to your impression of Maximino. You know that he's got like a private lawyer, he bought his girlfriend a club, he must be rich, he's a big guy, he steals money, he might be corrupt, he's getting orders from different places, he's connected. You later find out Lola is shot by Nick because of the picture she took. So you eventually meet Maximino, and he denies that Olivia is cheating with Nick, and he also denies that Charlie's money that he has belongs to Charlie. And you also hear about this blimp disaster in full, which is he made a blimp which says "Marry me Olivia" on it. It was a proposal, but it also crashed and killed Olivia's favourite cat. Now, it seems like that's kind of straightforward, but learning about things in a different order really subtly changes your impression of the city. So here's just a quick example. So before Maximino tells you the full story about how the blimp crashed and killed the cat, there are two other ways you can learn about it. The cat that was killed, Sanspoof, has been taxidermied and placed in a display container, and it has a plaque that says, that Sanspoof was tragically killed when the blimp crashed into the court. But it doesn't reveal that the blimp was a proposal. So you just have the information that the cat was killed by the blimp. But then you can also find a photo of the cat track, which shows the cats running around, but then you can see the blimp that says "Marry me Olivia," but it's before it crashes into anything, so you just have this lovely still picture of the cats and then a blimp that says "Marry me." So you can take those two pieces of information separately to merge them together and make Maximino's, but the way that so say if you read the Sanspoof one first, you'd be like, oh, that's sad, and you got the photo, you'd go, oh, that was the blimp that crashed. But if you got the photo first, you'd be like, oh, that's nice, he made someone's proposing, oh. And then you learn by reading the plaque that, oh no, that killed the cat. It's kind of like the Hitchcock effect. Say like there's a scene in a film where a couple are eating dinner and then they blow up. The scene is completely drastically changed if you show the bomb first before it blowing up, and then the audience knows that it will blow up, as opposed to just showing the scene where the audience knows as much as the couple and they just blow up. It's like that, because once you know the blimp will crash and kill the cat, it changes your idea of the picture. But if you just see the picture at first, you know as much as anyone else that was there on that day watching the race. So the order we just went through was Charlie, Seabees, Olivia, Nick, Lola, Max. So let's say you did it in the order of Seabees, Olivia, Nick, Charlie, Lola, Max. Charlie and the Seabees are from a different walk of life. You get Charlie's impression and you think, oh, he's presented as this slimy Peter Lorre type character, and he's a creepy guy, and it's like, oh well, he probably deserved it. Max probably isn't all that bad for, kicking this sleazeball out of this cat race. But you talk to the Seabees, and they're these workers, these working class type guys, and they're protesting Max. They say he's the big boy in town, he's the one that the whole city is ruined by his corruption. It's putting people like them out of work. It's making people like them hard to get honest work. So from the Seabees perspective, you empathize with them and think, oh yeah, Max and these big guys are corrupting the little guy, and it's not good. And so it's different to what you think of Charlie's. Whereas before, if you go Charlie, Seabee, you think Maximino's kind of dodgy, but Charlie's dodgy too, and then the Seabees reinforce that idea of Maximino being not all that good. But alternatively, if you went straight to the Blue Casket and just heard the stories of Olivia and Nick and Lola, that's a completely different crowd from the Seabees and Charlie. They're much more upper class and in the same sort of league as Max, and so you just get it as this kind of distant affair and tied up of local politics, and it makes Max seem like this guy that's only concerned with these three sort of people, maybe just like this very small, because a relationship and love triangles and stuff, it's a very like closed circle type thing. You wouldn't think it would affect the entire town. Each of these characters build on the information of Max, but the first one you kind of speak to kind of sets him in stone in the player's mind of the type of character he is, kind of, in a way, to an extent, because you talk to him and it gets revealed the character he really is. But you talk to Charlie, you see he's kind of you don't think he's too bad. Seabees, you think, oh, he's a big upper class guy. and he is not good, he's corrupt. You might even feel bad for Max if you go to Olivia's first, because then the only piece of information you know about him is that his girlfriend's cheating on him, and it's a much more vulnerable introduction than seeing the Seabees or Charlie's perspective on him. It makes him seem like the king of the city when you talk to Charlie or the Seabees because of the power he has over them, but you talk to Olivia and you see that the power Olivia has over him, and it's just a complete different introduction to Max. So as you can see, there's lots of different combinations of ways that a player can be introduced to Rubikava and its characters. And I could go on and on and on and talk about them and how they create a different impact of the level. But I think these examples make it clear that the order you talk to people does make a difference in this game. Not to the sort of canonical structure of the game, like you can talk to them in any order and they'll say the same thing, but it matters to the player. It also really highlights this kind of difference between games and more linear forms of entertainment. Say like a film, if you were introduced to a character in a film and the first thing you saw of them was their girlfriend cheating on them, that is a thesis statement for that character, because it's what the author of the work has chosen to introduce them as. But with Grimm, you have these multiple introductions that are up to the player to choose how the character is painted in their mind. In a way, it makes it more honest and more subjective, because one player's interpretation of the character may well be very different to someone else's, purely just because of the way they went about learning about the characters. Hi, just a little end note here. This bit is quite rambly and was done quite impromptu because I just found it and thought it would be relevant, so if you don't want to hear some botched explanations of literary theories, then you can skip to this time here. I made this presentation quite a while ago, talking about Mikhail Bakhtin, I think that's how you say his name. He was this literary theorist, and he wrote these kind of points of... It's been a while since I've read his work, so forgive me if I'm not being 100% accurate, but he wrote these points that kind of define what a novel is and how it's separate to like a play or another form of entertainment. And then Jesper Juhl, who wrote this kind of similar piece on how video games are different from narratives of like films and books and stuff, and he wrote it in the 1990s. And so I made this little presentation just kind of talking about how the way they've structured these points compare to each other, and I use Grim Fandango as a case study because it's a really perfect encapsulation of why games are different to films, but also rooted in narrative. So Bakhtin's principles were the carnivalesque, the dialogic, and the chronotope, and Juhl's principles were the sequence, incentive, and story and discourse, and they both had lots of different points, but these are the three ones I chose to compare because they worked really well together. And so the carnivalesque was this idea of like a narrative or a story of a novel from Bakhtin's perspective being born out of laughter and craziness and spontaneity, and this compared it to the mind being like a carnival, and how it was a much more much more experimental and direct sort of train of thought way of writing. It's narrative, but it's linear, but it's a direct sort of beaming into the author's head. But Juhl talks about sequence, and he talks about how there are fixed sequences in like other forms of narrative. But then he brings up how games are based on the freedom of the player and their possibility of influencing the course of action. And, I'm not blowing any minds here, because everyone knows that games are non-linear. But Grimm really implements this breaking of sequence in a really interesting way that does subtly affect the course of a narrative, even though it seems like a very linear game. I'll briefly just talk over these other two because they're not as important. But there was dialogic and incentive, and Bakhtin talked about the dialogic of this being a personal way in which an author speaks, and then the incentive, which I thought was funny, that Juhl talked about how the game talks to the player for it to be able to understand their world, and I used this picture from Grimm because I thought it was funny because it exemplifies both how a character in a point-and-click game will talk directly to the player because of the purpose of the game, but also that's a funny line because it's about being alone. Oh yeah, and then there's this chronotope and story and discourse. So the chronotope, it's complicated, but I'll try my best to explain it properly. But the chronotope is basically vehicles of narrative and vehicles of space and time in a story. So the example I talked about in Grim Fandango was how something like the save screen starts as a completely blank tapestry, but the more you play, the more it gets filled in. So it's kind of like a space for the narrative to take place in, if that makes any sense. But Jewel made this really cool little diagram of how a story plays out in a game and how discourse plays out in a game and the temporal distance between them. And so the story is how the player is making the game progress, and the discourse is how it's happening in real time in the world of the game. So say in Grim Fandango, how you spend like one night in Rubicava, probably over the course of it's probably like a couple hours, like 4 hours, maybe 3 hours, I don't know. The player can spend like 10 hours in there and it won't make a difference. It's still going to be 4 hours in the world of the game. And I thought that was interesting too, because the amount of space and time you spend in Rubicava solving puzzles, talking to people, does affect your experience. And comparing it again to like a linear form of entertainment, if you watched a film and it spent 4 hours on one scene that should have been an hour, it's obviously going to change your opinion and the way you experience it. So that's another way that Grim, and especially Rubicava, really exemplifies this way of narrative design and how it differs from linear forms of entertainment. So I'm sorry that bit wasn't as polished and well explained as my main points, which were that you can experience Rubicava in different orders and it does make a difference. But yeah, it's always sad to leave Rubicava. It feels like you're going to miss out on a lot of cool things, which is exactly how it should feel, having to leave such a vibrant place. It kind of seems like nowadays there's this kind of divide between classic studio adventure games and modern independent point-and-click games. And it's like they're completely sectioned off from each other. And Grim Fandango is often cited as being this kind of swan song of the classic games. And, although some of my favourite games of the genre have come from the last few years, and that they do these cool large-scale explorations like Rubicava, and they have even references to it, it makes me happy that I can always go back to Rubicava and experience the story just different enough that it's still interesting and impactful to me. I come back to Grim Fandango like every year or so, and sometimes it's just to play Rubicava. And I like to try and experience Rubicava in a slightly different way, choosing to talk to someone first that I didn't talk to the first time, seeing how it paints the story. It just, every time it leaves this slightly different impression of the place in my mind. And it's amazing. It's like, it's a shifting story and picture, and the way it's like there's no one way to remember it. I'm always going to have this evolving memory of it because of the different ways I'm experiencing it, which is something that's only done through games, and especially games that marry narrative and design in such an incredible way that is exemplified in Rubicava. People say that there's not a whole lot of replay value because once you learn a puzzle, there's no joy in solving it because you just go through the actions of doing it. But this choice, the amount of choice in this and options, is really what makes it replayable for me. I can come back to it any day. And every time I do play it, even though I've played it so many times, every time it's sad to leave Rubicava. And I think that's a testament to how enjoyable the narrative and the game design makes it to be in Rubicava. Hey, thanks for watching. Thank you so much to Brian Rodriguez, I hope I'm saying it right, but he let me use his cover of Remember Me from Coco, and I love it, it's so good, it fits so well, so good. His channel's below, he does some really good guitar instrumentals, and thank you so much to Pushing Up Roses, who let me use her gameplay footage from her Let's Play. It's a really good Let's Play, and it's what introduced me to Grim Fandango, so it was so cool to use it. And thanks again to Matty Rife, who let me use the map that I used, and I'll link that below too. I'm sorry if that presentation bit was a bit of a blur, but I just had it around and thought I'd put it in quickly, so I'm sorry about that. But if anyone wants it, I can go into further detail on Bakhtin's theories and stuff in relation to games, because it is very interesting and it's worthy for a whole video. Yeah, let me know what you thought. Let me know of your experiences in Rubacover and Grim Fandango. And yeah, thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next Monday. I'm thinking of making a video on either Dinosaurs, the Jim Henson Show, or Sam & Max, another point-and-click game. So if anyone's got a preference, you can say, well, but whatever. I'll make them both eventually, whatever. I'll see you next Monday, bye.